We are going to begin a new sermon series on salvation. Do you remember what we started with January this year? January this year, we started with Philippines, right? And then last 4 weeks, we've been looking at the topic of family. So we talked about the church as a family. And today, we are going to have a new sermon series on salvation. It will be a 15-week journey into the richness of what God has done to save us. And Pastor Hwang in Korean ministry, and he will be preaching the same message. So as one church, we'll be walking this path together. Now, 15 weeks might sound like a lot of time, right? That's like 4 months. And you might wonder, why so much time? Why do we spend so much time on just one topic, salvation? Isn't salvation just about believing in Jesus and be saved and go to heaven when I die? Why 15 weeks? The answer is kind of simple. It's because salvation is not simple. Salvation is not simple. God's salvation is vast. It's deeper and wider than we realize. Trying to grasp salvation all at once is trying to pour out the Pacific Ocean, the water, into a small cup. It's impossible, right? Without a limited understanding, it's really easy to miss the wonder of what we have received unless we really slow down each week and really truly reflect on the great salvation we have received. I remember one of our church members sharing her journey of becoming and receiving the U.S. citizen. Each stage of the process, sometimes this process was very slow and very difficult. There were a lot of things to study, but each process she went through gave her a deeper appreciation and confidence of what she was receiving. So in the same way, as we explore the many steps of salvation, I believe that we'll grow in love and gratitude and trust toward God who saved us. Another image that I want to tell you is that, reading through your journal from your childhood, you might be reminded of the moments that you have forgotten for so long. As you might be reading your journal, you might be reminded of how your parents really cared for you and provided for you and forgave you. And as you're reminded by each memory, you realize that they were always there for you. And they are always the first ones to love you, even though you might have been pretty rebellious. So that kind of stirs like a deeper trust and love within our hearts. So as we trace the steps of God's saving grace, we'll come to see exactly the same, that God always first loved us while we were sinners. And God saved us into a very deep and precious salvation. So my prayer over the next 15 years, 15 years. I think 15 years is a long time to study salvation, but over the next 15 weeks, that we would come to, as a church, come together and really appreciate God's great salvation. So where do we begin? Where do you think I would begin? Pastor Hwang and I both decided that sin is actually the perfect place to begin the salvation series. Why? Why do you think sin is a really great place to start talk about God's salvation? Any answers? Any thoughts? Why do we start with sin? It's because unless we understand what we have been saved from, we'll never appreciate what we have been saved into. It's one thing to be pulled out of the shallow water, and it's quite another to be lifted up from the depths of the ocean. So until we see how far we have fallen, we won't grasp how far God had to come down to rescue us. The darker the background is, the more clearly the light of grace really shines. So let's be honest today. Let's be honest that no one really wants to talk about sin in our lives. This past week, when I told many of the church members that this Sunday preaching will be about sin, more than one person sighed. Okay. Why? It's because sin is uncomfortable. It makes us feel guilty, and it sounds harsh. In contemporary churches, Christians, even contemporary Christians, they don't want to talk about sin. In many of the contemporary churches, they talk about sin less and less and less. Because why? Self-esteem is really important in this era, and sin is the one that decreases your self-esteem and self-value. So we don't want to talk about sin. That's also the trend in contemporary churches. So even Christians tend to reduce sins as just struggles or flaws or just bad habits that you have. And also outside the church, in the world, the word sin is virtually vanished. People don't talk about sin anymore. And in the world, people use softer terms like brokenness, imperfection, and mistakes. And while those words, brokenness, imperfection, and mistakes, those capture some of our experience, they really fail to name the deeper problem, deeper cause. But the Bible clearly exposes the human problem. Only the Bible clearly exposes human problem. Do you know what Romans 5 says about sin? Romans 5 says that sin is not some kind of small mistake we do, but it says sin reigns like a king. Sin reigns like a king in our lives. Paul says, just as sin reigned in death, sin reigns. So sin is a power, it's a ruler, it's a king. It doesn't quietly sit in the corner of your life, but it dominates the center of your heart. It enslaves our thoughts, our desires, and our decisions. When we look at our past sometimes, we wonder, wait, why did I do that? That was so stupid. That was so bad. Was it really me? Why was I capable of doing such a bad thing? What was that? Why was I so mean to that person? Why did I speak like that? Don't you sometimes wonder why you did that? Or why you said those things in your life? That is a proof that sin is reigning in us. But here's the thing about sin reigning as a king in our lives. It doesn't always show up wearing a crown. Hey, I'm the king. The sin doesn't come up wearing a crown, but it hides. Sin hides in our lives. It deceives us. It doesn't just push us to do wrong things, but it convinces us that we're doing just fine. Just fine, it's fine. Everyone is like that. It's fine. Just continue. And in that mechanism, sin hides. That's okay. That's how sin keeps its throne. It stays in power by keeping us blind to the truth that sin is like a reigning king. And one of the sin's most powerful tools, do you know what it is? Sin's most powerful tool in us, do you know what it is? It's self-deception. Self-deception. That's how sin rules in our hearts. Self-deception is the ability to lie to ourselves and justify our actions and blame others and minimize our sins. That's how sin continues to rule in us. It's like an exigua. Do you know exigua? It's a very disgusting parasite, lives in the ocean. It's a creature that quietly replaces a fish's tongue and convinces the host that nothing is wrong, all while feeding off the fish's life until the fish completely dies. So he replaces tongue until the fish dies. In the same way, sin slowly takes over and drains our spiritual life, and it makes us sin against God. It makes us distance from God and cut off our lives from God. And in the end, sin makes us be judged by God at the end for destruction. That's what sin does. And today we're going to turn to someone whose life tragically shows this pattern. King Saul. You know, King Saul is a very tragic character. I think it's one of the most tragic characters. And actually, when I came to this church, and I've been serving here the past 5 years, and many of you guys actually told me and even shed tears that you are afraid of becoming like King Saul because you see so much of yourself in King Saul. So today, let's expose of what's going on in Saul's life so that we'll be able to see how sin actually rules as the king, so that we can depose sin and really invite grace of Jesus Christ to be our king. All right, so Saul's story begins pretty humbly. Let's think about Saul's life. He came from the smallest tribe in Israel. Which tribe? Benjamin. And even within his family, he was very insignificant. And when God first called him, Saul was very shy, reluctant, and unimpressive. He was hiding when God appointed him, and people had to look for him because he was hiding in the luggage. So he was very small and unimpressive. But by the grace of God, God chose him and made him the king, the first king of Israel. And time passed. In this passage, time already passed, and Saul already won many battles, and he became successful, and he became a respected king. But success started changing his heart. In 1 Samuel 15, God commands Saul to bring justice against the Amalekites. Right? We read the text, how God commanded Saul to destroy completely the Amalekites. But why? You might wonder. It's because the Amalekites were merciless raiders. They would look for any opportunity to raid into different nations and tribes and kill people and take the plunders and rape people and take the children. So God is using Israel to punish them, to bring the act of justice. And the command was clear: destroy everything, leave no plunders, leave no spoils. Why? Because it was not a conquest for profit. It was not an act of imperialism, right? Imperialism, you go in there, you destroy people, and you bring what you want from them, right? But it was not that. It was an act of justice. By refusing to take the plunder, Israel would show to the whole other nations that they are different from the rest of the world, that they are executing God's justice, not building their own empire. So God is using Israel to execute justice. But Saul didn't obey fully. Verse 9 tells us that he spared King Agag, right? He spared King Agag, and what did he do? He kept the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs. Everything that was good. Saul kept it. So he disobeyed God. Why didn't he obey everything God said? It is because Saul was no longer small or weak in his eyes, right? He already achieved a lot of battles, and he became successful, and he became respected. So he wanted more. He wanted more recognition, more glory, And sparing King Agag was not an act of mercy. You would think, yeah, Saul left him, alive because Saul was merciful. No, it wasn't. Because in the ancient world, capturing a foreign king and let them live and capture them is a way to show that you're not just a king, but you are king of kings. I have captured so many kings. Look at how many kings under me. So you are showing as you are the king of kings. So here, Saul is really elevating himself. And verse 12 confirms what was really happening in Saul's heart. What does he do in verse 12? He sets up a monument for his own honor. He sets up the monument to honor himself. That's exactly how sin reigns as king in people's hearts. It hides beneath the success and slowly replaces the obedience to God with ego. And the sin becomes bigger and bigger, and it dictates people's decisions. Sin dictated Saul's life decisions. But Saul here, he didn't reject God outright, right? When Samuel came, what did he do? What did he say? He says, hey, I obeyed everything the Lord has commanded, right? So Saul didn't reject God outright, but he just made a small room in his heart for himself. And that's all sin needs to stay on the throne. That's how it happens. But Saul's story isn't just about him. It really directly applies to our lives too. Like Saul, many of us start off feeling really small, right? And we know how weak we are, insignificant and insecure we are. So we lean on God. We pray to God. We depend on God. But as life goes on, we experience a little success or more recognition, and people praise you, and it becomes so easy to take some of the credit. Yeah, I'm doing it well, and you start craving it a little more. And we start obeying God on the outside while quietly holding back on the inside. We do actually most of what God asks us to do, but not completely. Not completely. We keep what looks good, like Saul did, right? He kept what was good in his eyes, but he obeyed mostly. And we protect in our heart what makes us feel really important. And we build, like Saul, we build little monuments to honor ourselves through our work, through our image, through our reputation, or even serving at church. And we make sure that nobody finds about what's really in our hearts. And that's how sin actually stays a king and dictates our lives. Sin hides behind the excuses. And so we gotta ask, so how does sin actually hide itself? What kind of mechanisms does it actually use to hide itself? And we talked about that it's self-deception. And here Paul uses 3 interesting techniques that we also often use in our lives to hide our sin. The first one that he uses, and these things are pretty unconscious. He unconsciously uses it. The first one is blaming other people. Second is using the religious language to cover it up. And third one is to minimize his sin. The first one is blaming other people. Second is using the religious language to cover up. And third is to minimize his sin. And these 3 patterns actually show up in our lives, and we really try to not to see the sin on ourselves. Let's look at one by one. The first one is blaming other people. So here, Saul shifts the blame to other people. To who? Do you see anywhere? So Samuel came and said, hey, what is this sound of sheep bleating? What is this? Weren't you supposed to destroy everything? Why do I hear the sheep sound? And what does Saul say? What does he say? The soldiers, they did it, right? But Saul is the king, and he's the one in charge. And there's no way the soldiers could have brought. I was in the military, and I know how it works. It's impossible. If the king didn't order, it wouldn't have happened. And this sin, blaming other people, is actually the oldest sin in the Bible. Think about the Adam in the garden. What did Adam say? She did it, the woman you made. And what did Eve say? It's the serpent. And they don't acknowledge their sin. That they wanted to honor themselves. They wanted to be the king. They never acknowledged that by blaming other people. That's what Saul is doing. And we do that all the time. So let's talk about that. So, in what ways do we do that? Like Saul. We might neglect prayer and reading the Bible, and we might say, hey, I'm just in busy season right now. Life is hectic, and I have a lot of work right now. It's busy season. I'm sure God understands. Right? Blaming on the season. And we lash out at our spouse and kids and blame that it was the stress at work. We stop coming to church regularly and say it's because of our kids' schedule, or the church is not feeding us enough, or the church people here, they're not my type. So they blame other people while it's actually you who don't want to worship God. Because you don't really love God. Because you honor yourself more. So it's always someone else. It's always something else. It's always the circumstances. It's always the pressure. It's always the season. It's our childhood, our personality, our exhaustion. And we would say anything. We would give any excuses to avoid saying, Lord, it was me. I sinned. I try to honor myself rather than honoring you. And I try to establish my life apart from you. We would say anything to avoid that ugly truth. That's what Saul did, and that's what we do too. And that's how sin hides in us. What about the second techniques? Second technique that Saul uses is that he uses the religious language to cover up his disobedience. When Samuel confronts him, Saul says, what does he say? After the soldiers did it, what does he say next? Yeah, we kept the best of the sheep to sacrifice to the Lord. If you actually don't read carefully, you would just think, oh, what's wrong with Saul? I mean, he captured these things to sacrifice to the Lord. That's easier to think this way, but that's not. It's the way sin actually works in our lives. Do you know what he's actually saying? He's saying that don't look at here, don't look at the fact that I brought the sheep, but look at the fact that I brought it to, it's like I did a lot of good things. So don't look at here, but look at there, like what I'm doing well. God, please look at the things that I'm doing well, not the things that I do wrong. That's what Saul is doing, and we do that a lot, right? We might say in our lives, God, I don't really give offering or financially, but look at how much time I serve at church. Time is money, so right? Look at how much time I give, not how little I give financially, right? Or you might say, well, I haven't been spending much time reading the Bible, and I'm not a faithful Bible reader. But I've been really busy helping and leading the church, so, that makes up, right? God, I'm serving a lot, so Don't look at the fact that I don't read the Bible or pray, but look at this part. Or you might say, I know I have bitterness here towards some people at church, but you know how I deeply love this group of people that I love. So don't look at the people that I'm bitter toward, but look at the people, how much I love these people. And God is not fooled by that, right? He doesn't want our excuses or distractions, but He wants our complete obedience. All right, so what about the third way? Third way how sin hides in us and rule as a king. It's that we minimize our sin. When Samuel confronts Saul insists. What does it say in verse 20? It says, "But I did obey the Lord. I did obey the Lord." And Saul said, "I went on a mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed," right? He said, "I completely obeyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king." Do you know what he's saying? He's saying, sure, I didn't do everything, but I did almost completely. And what I did wrong was so small that it shouldn't cancel out the good things that I did. So Saul adds here, and he says, I obeyed completely, I completely destroyed the Amalekites, and he says, and. But God says, oh. He says, and God is saying, you should have done all. You should have obeyed all. So how does it play in our lives? We might cheat a little, or we say, at least I'm not stealing. And we might hold on to anger, but say, well, I'm not hurting anyone physically. Or we might think that, well, I shouldn't watch these kind of contents, but at least I'm not harming anyone. And, right? Do you know a drama called, TV show called Breaking Bad? The main character starts making meth, the drug. And do you know what he constantly says? He says, it's just to provide for his family. It's just to provide for my family. And he convinces himself that it's just temporary. It's partial. It's just a little wrong for the whole good. And that little thing, it continues to grow and actually takes over his life. And when we minimize the sin we have in our lives, we know we have sins in our lives, right? When we minimize them and say that it's not that big, then one day it will not look like a rebellion or a sin at all. It will be so normal to you, and you will continue to see. Here, God never asked mostly, right? God doesn't want you to obey mostly, but He wants you to obey all. That's what God is asking. But let's ask the question, when do we actually deceive ourselves? When do we actually hide our sin? At all times? No, not everything. Only the truths that are too painful to face. If it is a painful truth that we don't want to face, we avoid it through these techniques. The ones that threaten our image and expose our weakness, the one that shows that truly we are sinners, we would deceive ourselves. Deep down, we all carry fear that we are small and we don't matter. And to avoid that fear, we hide. That's how self-deception works. And that's how sin keeps its throne. We protect our sin, hide our sin so that it can continue. That's how exactly it happened to Samuel, right? Samuel was once very small, very, very small, but he became uh, arrogant later. And he really wanted to look big in the eyes of the people, right? He spared the king Agag to show off, and he built a monument to himself, and he kept the animals, the best animals, to increase his wealth. And God said, "Do not take anything," but Saul couldn't let go of the chance of gaining more and to become bigger in his own eyes. So in the same way, we'll continue to deceive ourselves when we feel like we are insecure and we need to be big in the eyes of the people. And that sin will make us distant from God. And what are some of the ways that we can break free from self-deception and sin? The first one, it's a summary of the sermon. The first is to know that sin is not just small things that we do wrong, but it actually reigns as the king. It really drives our life decisions and emotion and reason and will, every part of our lives. And second is that sin continues to rule by hiding itself. And third is how do we be free from sin and self-deception? Is to recognize when other people point out the sin in our lives. For example, Samuel points out, "Hey, what is the bleating of the sheep? I hear the sound. What is it?" And at that moment, Saul should have repented, really acknowledging his sin. So when other people challenge your sin, don't make excuses, but really know that we are driving by sin. We are deceiving ourselves so that we don't have to face that sin in us. And fourth is that sin, we deceive ourselves when we have the big desire to be big in our eyes. And lastly, fifth is that the sin will make you disobey God, and the consequence of that sin will be destruction. So I know it's a very heavy topic, sin in our lives. It really drives us. And the only way to free ourselves from sin is to acknowledge before God and really kneel before Him and raise your hand and say, "Lord, I'm a sinner. I need your help. There's no power in me that can overcome the power of sin. I am so sinful and there's nothing good in me to save myself. It is only you, by the grace of God. And only then God will free you from our sins and give us the eternal life."